and by his foreign policy envoys on NATO for these member states to start paying their fair share. Now, we've seen a greater amount of NATO alliance member states starting to spend at least 2% of their GDP on defense, but there still needs to be more of these countries, particularly, when you're looking at Germany, one of the largest economy in Europe. There is, a concern that these European countries, with their massive economies, are still relying on the United States across the Atlantic to bear most of the burden of defending the European continent. And in fact, when it became clear that President Trump was going to win, or that President Trump had a chance of coming back to the White House, we started seeing some East European countries that were members of the NATO military alliance quickly starting to spend 2% of their GDP on defense. And now you could certainly expect the Trump effect to take place now, with President Trump being reelected back into the White House. These NATO member states will have to start placing more of their burden on their own economies and on their own militaries, and start spending more on their own armies, instead of putting the burden almost entirely on the American taxpayers and the American military to defend the European continent. And I think you're going to start seeing more of that happening now with President Trump returning to the White House, given just how strongly of a case he made back in 2016. And I think it was very clear to European capitals that when President Trump promises something, he will absolutely carry it about. And so if these European countries, NATO member states, want the U.S. military to still be positioned in Europe and military bases in Europe, well, they're going to have to pay their fair share, or you can certainly expect the U.S. to start taking action, because that's what President does. He takes action.
While the Trump administration had a somewhat consistent approach toward Turkey, balancing sanctions with military and economic cooperation, how do you assess the effectiveness of this dual approach?
Now, Turkey is an important member of the NATO military alliance, particularly when it comes to security, and with the Balkans, with Turkey's relationship with Serbia and Albania and Kosovo. These are all areas that the U.S. has national security equities, and the free flow of energy from the Caspian through Azerbaijan and through the European Southern Gas Corridor, which goes through the Trans-Anatolian gas corridor through Turkey and to Eastern and Southern Europe. And on a personal level, President Trump had a very cordial and productive relationship with President Erdogan. And I think that relationship on a strategic level and on a leadership-to-leadership level will continue through President Trump's second term.
Well, we are slightly moving to our region, the South Caucasus. How would you assess the Trump administration's overall strategy toward the South Caucasus? Were there any marked changes in the U.S. engagement with Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Georgia compared to previous administrations?
Look, the Southern Caucasus, frankly, was an area of a major foreign policy failure for the Biden-Harris administration. I mean, look, if you look at examples of major diplomatic deals and peace deals that became a reality under the first term in the Trump administration, like the Abraham Accords, where President Trump's administration successfully managed to negotiate a peace treaty and a strategic cooperation between Muslim Arab Gulf states and the Jewish state of Israel. I think we can see that same type of deal-making take place and succeed in the Southern Caucasus with President Trump back in the White House. And, look, Trump is going to bring very capable diplomats, very capable deal makers back in Washington. And with the whole world will now take Washington's leadership seriously. And that will give Washington more leverage to fairly negotiate, strategic deals. I would like to see, just like we saw with the Abraham Accords with the Arab Gulf states and Israel, I would love to see the NOAA Accords, where the U.S. plays a role in facilitating a trilateral peace deal between Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Turkey that would lead to economic prosperity for all these countries. And that has really been a hallmark of the Trump administration in these deals like the Abraham Accords. That led to a great deal of cross-trade between Israel and the Arab Gulf states. And where you see prosperity, you see peace. And I would like to see the Trump administration carry forth a similar diplomatic approach in the Southern Caucasus, where it's about prosperity, where everyone wins, and that is good not only for security in the region, stability in the region, but also for American national interest in the long term.
Right, Toba, I guess you will agree with me that Trump was often criticized for being less engaged in the South Caucasus compared to his predecessors. Do you agree with this assessment? And if so, what were the key reasons for this perceived disengagement previously?
I think there's a great deal that there's only so much that you can accomplish in 4 years, given that the Trump administration was really focusing on Middle East security and China with Iran and the destabilizing influence of Iran. And remember, the Azerbaijan's liberation war happened in 2020, and actually the Trump administration was criticized by some for not coming to doing more. And if anything, sometimes not taking action is more important than taking action. And that's because the Trump administration pursued a non-interventionist America first policy. The era of American intervention militarily across every corner of the globe has come to an end. And that's why you're seeing this theme from President Trump's world view of America first, prosperity for our allies that would lead to peace. I think that is the right diplomatic blueprint moving forward in the second Trump administration. And I think that blueprint is what will best benefit the entire Southern Caucasus region. And the era of neoconservative intervention, that is over. And I think President Trump will be the right person to facilitate Washington playing a constructive role in making a trilateral peace deal between Azerbaijan, Turkey, and Armenia a reality, hopefully in the not so distant future.
So I want to know
President Trump has 4 years.
I want to ask your personal opinion. So how will Trump administration navigate this complex issue, and how did it impact U.S.-Azerbaijan and U.S.-Armenia relations? From one side, we can speak about Azerbaijan-Armenia in post-conflict negotiations, but from the other perspective, there is a separate, and we should see this division between the relations United States-Azerbaijan and United States-Armenia, how Washington is trying to balance in between of two South Caucasus republics.
Look, I think the free flow of energy into Europe and into international markets is absolutely in American interest. And that's where the European Southern Gas Corridor is going to be extremely critical for American strategic interests. Remember, we're talking about economic interests and energy security interests. Look, the U.S. military, in my view, is overstretched. We're facing new threats in the Pacific, in Taiwan, potential new a conflict with China that could potentially loom, that could take place even in the second Trump term. And that really has Washington defense officials, concerned. And you've got American military bases all across the Middle East and in East Europe and in Central Europe. So it's a matter of allocating resources militarily. The U.S. economy is still in bad shape, and President Trump is going to make it a priority to improve and recover the economy that in the past 4 years has faced such dire straits, under the Biden-Harris administration. So when it comes to American relations with Azerbaijan and Armenia, I think on one hand you have to look at Azerbaijan's military cooperation with Turkey, a NATO member state, and I think that strategic military cooperation between Azerbaijan and NATO should continue in the future. And I think that the U.S., as NATO's biggest backer and security guarantor, should continue to support that critical relationship between Ankara and Baku. But at the end of the day, a peace deal, a trilateral peace deal that would normalize relations between Baku, Yerevan, and Ankara is the way to go. And for the U.S. to be able to help facilitate that without having to expend resources and to ensure that a deal in the Southern Caucasus maintains stability in that region, which ultimately is in American interest, is in European interest. But again, this goes back to the Trump policy of prosperity leads to peace. And I think you will see President Trump's foreign policy envoys, once that team comes together, really reflect that philosophy.
And my last question, just to conclude, do you expect any shift in U.S. military cooperation or security assistance to the South Caucasus during the Trump administration?
That's a very good question. I think you're going to see the Trump administration really emphasize burden sharing. And, of course, the U.S., is one of the biggest exporters, foreign military exporters around the world. People want to buy American military products. It's good for American business. It's good for jobs in the U.S. and it's good for American companies. But also, I think you will see the Trump administration support countries that support themselves from a military and defense perspective. I think you will see countries that have invested in their military, in their armies, in modernizing their armies without depending on the U.S. Entirely, as gaining a level of respect in the Trump administration. And that's something that we've seen Turkey and Azerbaijan do as emerging powers in the South Caucasus, in the Black Sea, and the Caspian region. And I think that will greatly, potentially, that sets a good stage for positive relations between these countries and the United States. Now that we have a new president, President Trump, he has a mandate. He won over 300 electoral votes. He's won the popular vote. And the entire world is ready to welcome President Trump back on the global stage with real leadership back to Washington.
Obay, thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Just to remind you, watched Inside Politics. Stay with us and see you in the next edition.
As an official media partner for COP29, AnewZ will be here for every moment of this vital event.
We will be bringing you the latest news, biggest interviews and most interesting voices throughout the next 2 weeks.
Plus, we will keep you updated via our website and social media channels.
So whatever your view on the state of our planet and the ability of global leaders to tackle the climate crisis,
we'll be keeping you updated, helping your voice heard.
Something strange has been happening to the beaches across the Caribbean in recent years. Large amounts of a brown seaweed called sargassum have been washing up on shorelines. Normally found in the open ocean, sargassum causes a whole host of issues for coastal ecosystems and communities. So where is this seaweed coming from? Let's find out. Historically, sargassum was found in scattered patches outside its main range. But then something strange happened. In the winter of 2009 to 2010, unusual wind patterns pushed water eastward from the Sargasso Sea towards the Strait of Gibraltar, where a portion was transported southward by the Canary Current along the coast of Africa, delivering a large sargassum population to the tropical Atlantic, where it thrived on nutrients from various sources. This established a new, separate population of the seaweed and gave rise to
the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt.
That's Roy Armstrong, a professor in the Department of Marine Sciences at the University of Puerto Rico. Roy has been trying to figure out the impacts of sargassum blooms that have been washing up on Caribbean coastlines.
Sargassum is an essential habitat in the open ocean. Think of it as an oasis in the middle of the desert. It provides shelters, for turtles, for many fishes.
Problem is, when fueled by excess nutrients, sargassum can quickly grow and upend the ecology around the islands, which can have negative consequences for nearshore communities and their economies. One of the biggest threats is the pungent and toxic hydrogen sulfide gas that sargassum releases when it decomposes on shorelines. There is so much sargassum that now regularly washes up on the coast that local governments are searching for ways to estimate the size and location of blooms and their trajectories so they can better predict when it will reach the shoreline.
Because we cannot deal with all the sargassum. So what we need is to prioritize. If you can track with satellites a patch that is going to impact a very sensitive area, then you know that that's the highest priority. Now you want to intercept that sargassum before it comes to shore.
Computer models can rewind a clock to see how currents transport water across the Atlantic and help researchers piece together where blooms originate. Additionally, instruments on NASA satellites can detect the signatures of large blooms as they move across the ocean.
The remote sensing technology of NASA is very important, first to detect sargassum and then to track it. And this way, we will have a pretty good idea if a large patch has the potential of coming to the coast and accumulating and therefore impacting the marine ecosystems.
PACE, one of NASA's newest satellites, can add to our growing knowledge of sargassum blooms, further helping researchers decipher this new threat.
Sargassum in general, I don't think it's something that we're going to see go away because that new population is in an area that is perfect for growth. So the issue is how we're going to deal with the sargassum problem. And that's one of the reasons that satellite remote sensing could be very beneficial.
Sargassum continues to threaten coastal communities around the Caribbean, but satellites and instruments can track how and why these blooms occur and help us better safeguard coastal ecosystems and the communities that rely on them.
As an official media partner for COP29, AnewZ will be here for every moment of this vital event.
We will be bringing you the latest news, biggest interviews, and most interesting voices throughout the next 2 weeks.
Plus, we will keep you updated via our website and social media channels.
So whatever you're new on the state of our planet and the ability of global leaders to tackle the climate crisis,
We'll be keeping you updated, helping your voice heard.
Good morning, you're watching AnewZ live from Baku to the world.
There's a long line of
To truly understand this conflict, we need to look beyond the normal conventions of geopolitics.
region. Well, this is a major development, not just for the governments of countries across the South Caucasus and Central Asia. Its impact is also increasingly being felt in Brussels, London and Berlin.
President of the broadcaster, just a short question. Leaders of some European countries are not attending the event. How would you comment on that?
I am present. I am present on behalf of the EU. Thank you.
Can it be seen as an attempt to avoid the funding goals? Mr. Secretary General, what is the key for oil-rich countries to achieve as soon as possible the green transition goals?
But first of all, I would like to congratulate our Brazil, Azerbaijan. This is, this kind of, the world level is class. First event is COP29, but COP29 is like first this kind of big event, not only for Brazil, Azerbaijan, for our Turkic world. This why is honor and for us, for all of us. And secondly, this theme of this COP29 in solidarity on green world is also saying about how is important this issue. So actually, one is our goal is in organization Turkic states also to main goal one is to provide for us for future of our generation is not only our heritage and also is real is environmental world. So this why is today's starting this event of COP29 is I believe, I hope it will bring an end of during and the end of this event will bring some achievements. It's first how we can together reach achievement for green world. In our also one is motto is birlikte güçlüyüz. This is also working for the to how can build this green world.
What is the key to achieving climate change goals and reducing carbon emissions?
It's very important that we have a common agenda. We look all into one direction. Second of all countries have to look into one and the same direction. Third, we have to also level up the financing mechanisms of climate change. It is the right time to join forces together. If we don't join forces this time, the world will decide its own way and the world exists without us. Once again, I would like to congratulate Azerbaijan and His Excellency the President of Azerbaijan for his initiative and for hosting the COP meeting here in Azerbaijan, Baku.
Mr. Broadcaster, just a short question. How do you assess how do you assess the perspectives of cooperation with Azerbaijan in the sphere of renewable energy?
It is very important conference for whole world, and also in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Southeast Europe. I hope that we together work on a better future for whole world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. What do you think is key obstacle to reaching climate change goals?
أيوة أنا فهمت السؤال. المشكلة هي أن القوى القادرة على وقف هذه المأساة لا تريد ذلك.
Around 80 heads of states and governments have descended on Baku for the United Nations two-week climate summit. The summit's negotiating priorities will be competing for governments' resources and attention against economic concerns, wars in Ukraine and Gaza, and last week's US re-election of Donald Trump. The president of the previous conference, Sultan Ahmed Al-Jaber, called on all parties to unite, act and deliver.
When sectors work together, we can lift economies and lower emissions. We can make climate and socio-economic progress together at the same time. And we can turn declarations on paper into decisive action on the ground. The critical success factor for all climate progress is finance. We continue to call on all sources, public and private, to make finance more available, more accessible, and more affordable.
The president of COP29, Mukhtar Babayev, emphasized the urgent need to ramp up global climate ambitions and the needs and priorities of developing countries.
Our plan is based on two pillars: to enhance ambition and enable action. This means setting out clear climate plans and delivering the finance we need. These two pillars are mutually reinforcing, each sending a strong signal to the other. Because as we mobilize climate finance, we allow for high ambitions. And as we signal together higher ambition, we build trust to unlock greater financial commitments.
He also added action needs to begin now and must keep the momentum going.
Azerbaijan is determined to step up to the biggest issues on the biggest stages and lead by example. We have beaten to odds before. People have doubted us. Let us prove them wrong. But no single country or initiative can solve this crisis. This is everyone's conference. Success or failure will be collective. So our message to you is this: Azerbaijan can build a bridge, but you all need to walk across it. In fact, we need to start running.
In closing, he reminded delegates that despite their diversity, shared humanity must be at the heart of their efforts.
As the UN Climate Change Conference, COP29, kicks off in Baku, Azerbaijan, delegates from around the world are set to engage in crucial negotiations aiming at tackling the urgent issue of rising global temperatures. Special Advisor to the UN Secretary-General, Selwyn Charles Hart, says more needs to be done.
Climate crisis. The reality is that we are not in a good place. While important progress has been made since the adoption of the Paris Agreement less than a decade ago, the world is still not moving fast enough to limit warming to the 1.5 degree goal of the Paris Agreement and prevent the worst impacts of the climate crisis. Many of these impacts accelerate across the world, and no continent, no country, no region has been spared. In addition, as we see the pace of the transition accelerate, it is doing so in a very unequal way. Since the adoption of the Paris Agreement, 4 out of every $5 in clean energy was invested in the advanced economies and China. The rest of the world, sadly, is being left behind. And if we continue at this rate, the climate crisis will definitely exacerbate inequalities between countries and within countries. COP29 represents an important milestone in our fight against the climate crisis. It is a COP where the main negotiating outcome will be a new goal on finance, a new climate finance goal. The reality is no one country, no one group of country can solve the climate crisis. We need everyone to make an extra effort. The leadership of the G20 will be crucial. We need all G20 countries really to be on the high end of the ambition scale when they submit their new national climate plans. Countries are currently spending 9 times more to make fossil fuels cheaper than cleaner alternatives. 9 times more. So taxpayers are subsidizing. Taxpayers across the world are subsidizing fossil fuels, but also footing the bill for the climate damage that the use of fossil fuels is causing. There's always skepticism around big international UN meetings. But the reality is that that multilateral cooperation on climate through these COPs has really ensured that the issues of climate change have risen, have ensured to the top of the global agenda. I urge you to use this as a moment to demonstrate your solidarity with those on the front lines of the climate crisis. More than ever, this is a moment. Use this moment to rebuild trust and rebuild hope that we can truly solve this crisis.
Indonesian authorities rushed to evacuate reluctant residents from villages impacted by the volcanic eruption of Lower Tobi Laki-Laki on Sunday. The approximately 1,600-metre volcano has been spewing material since November the 3rd, leading officials to expand the danger zone and evacuation efforts.
We plan to evacuate some of the remaining residents again, but due to our limited transport fleet, we will wait. As soon as we can, there will be further evacuation of the remaining villages.
As the authorities only had a limited number of vehicles, they could only assist willing evacuees, while some, like 48-year-old Matthias Budi, chose to leave independently.
I would rather evacuate by myself because I have fields and plants here and want to collect and sell the crops in order to survive. I've been here for 1 week since last Monday.
On Saturday, the Volcanology Agency extended the restricted zone from 8 to 9 kilometres from the crater's southwest to northwest.
People evacuated in the Philippines as Typhoon Toraji made landfall early Monday. Heavy rain and strong winds hit the northern regions of the city of Luzon. Around 2,500 residents were evacuated to shelters with schools and offices closed. Winds reached 81 miles per hour. This is the fourth cyclone to hit the Philippines in a month. Recent storms have killed over 150 people.
Carbon dioxide filling the atmosphere. Recent data suggests an 11% increase in CO2 emissions within the last 20 years. That's according to a report released last month by the United Nations, indicating greenhouse gases in the atmosphere have reached record-breaking levels.
Carbon dioxide is accumulating in the atmosphere faster than at any time experienced during human existence. And because of the extremely long lifetime of CO2 in the atmosphere, we are committed to rising temperatures for many, many years to come.
Experts say greenhouse gases are the cause of a rise in global temperatures. A time-lapse over a 2-decade period released by NASA reveals a stark rise in global surface temperatures. Watch the map turn red. European Union scientists believe this year's global temperatures are going to be the hottest in over 125,000 years. And it's with this context that the COP29 climate conference kicks off in Azerbaijan.
We must strike the heart of the crisis, greenhouse gases. The G20 must lead global efforts to cut emissions 9% a year to 2030, phase out fossil fuels fast and fairly, and accelerate the renewables revolution so that we limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The climate crisis is here. We can't postpone protection. We must adapt now.
There's pressure on governments arriving in Baku to showcase their plans on just how much they're willing to cut back on emissions to prevent global temperatures rising. Reducing CO2 emissions will remain a key part of the discussions.
Pope Francis urged leaders at the United Nations COP29 climate summit in the capital of Azerbaijan to give an effective contribution in protecting the environment. The head of the Catholic Church also expressed closeness to the victims in Valencia and other parts of Spain who are dealing with the consequences of the deadly floods which killed more than 220 people. His thoughts also went to those living on the island of Flores in Indonesia, where a series of volcanic eruptions of Mount Lewatopi Laki-Laki killed 9 people and injured dozens of others. Turkey is one of the leading countries in Europe for its renewable energy production. That's according to the International Energy Agency president. Fatih Birol was discussing the recent unveiled Renewable Energy 2035 roadmap for offshore wind power. He pointed out that 2025 could usher in a new era of global trade wars as countries strive to secure a powerful position in emerging energy technologies. Birol noted that many developed nations are turning to trade regulations and tariffs to shield local markets from lower-cost imports when it comes to solar panels, batteries, and electric vehicles. He warned that while these measures are intended to bolster renewable energy sectors, they could also incite significant trade disputes, potentially impacting the global economy if left unchecked. Turkey and the World Bank are in discussion to finance a $28 billion energy transmission infrastructure project, a cornerstone of Turkey's renewable energy transformation plan. The initiative aligns with Turkey's 2035 renewable energy targets, aiming to expand the country's